IVM.
Paying your credit card bills on time is a great policy. This IPL season, with the Cred Mega Jackpot Week from 27th April to 3rd May, stand a chance to win some fabulous prizes like one Tata Safari car or gold worth 10 lakhs or even one entire Bitcoin worth close to 50 lakhs. Now that is amazing. Don't miss out. Just download Cred.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of All Things Policy. Today, we will be having a rather interesting discussion based on Lieutenant General Prakash Menon's recent op-ed in the print on the need to depoliticize the Indian police. Having said that, I want to start by talking about the recent Naxalite attack that took place in Chhattisgarh. So most of you already read about it, but for those who have not, let me tell you a little bit about it briefly in about 2-3 sentences. So on 4th April 2021, in the jungles of Chhattisgarh, particularly in the Sukma-Bijapur border, a Maoist attack took place and it killed about 22 CRPF Jawans of our security personnel and many more injured. And it even led to one of the Jawans being abducted. So this was considered one of the worst Naxalite attacks that has taken place in the last few years. General Menon, you mentioned this incident in your article, and I want to start by asking you my first question. Is this attack, symptomatic of deeper problems within India's police force?
Well, first, let's be very clear that the police system as it exists has got many parts. So this particular example is about the CRPF, which is the cabinet decided force to tackle insurgencies and internal disorder. So it is about the CRPF operating against the Naxalites in central India. And therefore, this example itself is insufficient to explain the other part of the police system. That is why I actually connected to another incident which is going on parallelly, which was about the DGP of Mumbai who had complained against his boss, the Home Minister. And it was followed by the resignation and the Supreme Court intervention and so on. So although they were two unconnected events, they're actually connected because both reflect the deeper malice in the police system itself. And that deeper malice, I say, is about the politicization of the police force system itself.
Okay, sir. So what I wanted to ask, continuing this topic, is that you mentioned in your article that we seem to have enough money to raise more CRPF battalions. Yet, on the other hand, state police are understaffed and they seem to be struggling with budgetary issues regarding equipment as well as manpower. So, can you tell us about this discordance between money being available to CRPF or rather Central Armed Police Forces while the state be lagging behind?
No, this is a very important question that you have raised, and it actually goes to show sort of misdirected policy. Because all central forces, when they operate, have to depend upon the state police force. If the state police force are not up to it, you can send in any amount of central force. It will definitely not be as effective as it should be, because the complete system on which this is pivoted, on which you're dealing with, is the state police. I've served for a long time in J&K in various positions, and I know that without the state police being what it is, even the Indian Army cannot be so effective. If it has to be effective, then it has to be brute force. But the point is that all these actions sort of are mostly against one's own citizens, or even if it is not, where one's own citizens are involved. And therefore, the privileging of raising central forces has been going on, not by this government, for previous governments also, who have just increased the numbers of the central forces to such an extent, while the state forces have remained, they don't have the money, and therefore have remained weak. There are a lot of deficiencies in their cadre, because they are the one who are intimately connected to the people. And all this fight which we're talking about is about the people. It's about the locals. And unless you have the your state police have been taking an active part, both in terms of being the local people who know the terrain, who know the people, who know their culture, who know the language. Whereas central police, people most of the time you might be operating in an area where you don't even know the language of the locals. So without the state police, this has been one of the deficiencies noticed long ago, and I myself have written in a couple of places about that we have privileged central forces. Unfortunately, it continues, and the context in which I used it for the CRPF war, that the CRPF leadership believes that you increase the numbers and you'll be more effective. My point was that as long as the quality of the CRPF force itself, and there are many reasons for that, remains what it is, it cannot be made up by numbers. Because quality is more important here, because it is not about mass. It is about how do you get the people on your side. It is about winning their hearts. If you don't have the people with you, then the Naxalites or any other insurgent groups will probably at least have most of the people with them, because they know that the state can't protect the people, so they seek protection from the insurgent groups. So this is, you're absolutely right. It's a policy issue which needs to be actually rectified.
Yes, gentlemen, and I completely agree with what you said. And also, since we're speaking of this Naxalite attack, from what I have read, the CRPF DG was quick to, issue a statement saying that there were no lapses, and it was at both at the operational and the intelligence front. And it was not just him who said this; it was also the chief minister of Chhattisgarh. But in reality, if you ask any, counter-insurgency specialist or counter-terrorism specialist, they will tell you that this was an intelligence and a tactical failure. So why is there no accountability taken here? Why do you think what do you think the reason for this is?
See, this has been standard practice, that you promise that you will improve the situation, which is what the CRPF has been telling the government. The politicians are either ignorant or can't make a judgment, so they just go along with the police. And whenever incidents like this happen, and don't forget the incident of 2010, which is much worse, where we lost 76 people at the same action, the normal thing is go for a cover up. No one is to blame, just whatever reasons that you have. But as you said, anybody who knows about this, what goes on in such operations, will tell you that this is simple incompetence, ineptitude, poor leadership. That you actually went after to catch a battalion commander, in this case, one guy, and you put about 1,000 odd people for that task in the jungle. You're asking for trouble. And the thing is, and that's a sad part, they don't seem to learn their lessons, because there are so many incidents which have repeated themselves.
Yeah.
So the problem is that they don't seem to be any relief from the fact that a repetitive cycle seems to be endless. That there seem to be no move by the center to reform the CRPF, nor by the states to actually reform the state police, because this is connected to the larger point which I raised, which is about the fact that police reforms have been mandated by the Supreme Court based on Mr. Prakash Singh, former DGP of police, a very professional police officer. The courts have ruled. It's been more than 10 years, and the states have all implemented it according to their convenience. They have mostly ducked the essential instruction of the state. What is the essential instruction? It is that the police must maintain an independent opinion and they must operate under the law. But here we see, look at UP. After all, it's now common knowledge that because the criminal justice system is weakened along with the police system, which is the other system, which is actually part of a larger system, they have decided that we will take the law into their own hands, and encounters have become very common.
Yeah.
Not only are they common and known to the public, there is no reaction from the courts. The courts also seem to be looking the other way. So we now have a situation by it is rule by the law, not of the law. And that's unfortunate. So we have to look at both these systems together, the police system and the criminal justice system. And that is what I actually link finally in my article, that both these require major reforms. And it is not that we haven't had any number of committees who have actually pointed this out. We have a Supreme Court judgment. Yet, who's responsible for not doing it? The political leaders, both at the center and the states, because they are useful political tools for carrying out an agenda to protect and expand political power, even if it is outside the law. That is the state of affairs, and it is very obvious that we need to change.
Yeah, I think it's very important that you highlighted the example of UP specifically because, I feel too that the criminal justice system there is extremely, if I could say, compromised. And, in a way, the police have taken the law into their own hands, and that has enabled them to somewhat conduct illegal killings and without any answer to anyone. So it's very important that you highlighted that example. And Ruturaj, like, what do you think about this?
Yes, I wanted to make an observation here regarding what General Menon said about political will at the state level and including locals in fighting against crime or Naxalism in this particular instance we are talking about. It's a interesting observation that we all know since 2012 the number of districts affected by Naxal problem, the so-called red corridor, has decreased significantly. Currently, we have around 60 to 90 districts which are affected by Naxals. And the greatest decrease has been in states which have incorporated certain specialized units in their state police, which have a significant proportion of the locals, may it be tribals or even non-tribals, which are aware of the local languages and customs and the terrain. Example, Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh or C60 of Maharashtra, or even the counterinsurgency force, which is generally not in the limelight but pretty effective, of West Bengal. So it's a very interesting observation that wherever states on rare occasions have shown initiative, have included the locals, things have improved. So we definitely need to include more locals. I am not suggesting we go the extreme way and resurrect Salva Judum in its like version 2.0, but definitely from the side of police, we need locals to be made part of the law and order, and so they feel that they have something at stake, and overall maybe things will change.
What we don't realize is the power of antagonism in a violent situation against the outsider. I've actually felt it very much in Kashmir that if a policeman who's local commits a mistake, does something which is against the citizen, and if the same thing is done by an army personnel, the way they look at the police and the way they look at the army are completely different because they view it first that this guy is a local, and the army is an outsider. And this probably prevails across the country wherever there is, whether it's the northeast or the Naxal areas. So while the state cannot possibly afford to have all locals, the framework on which these outsiders function must be of a local origin. That is why they all operate under local police authorities, EIGs, and so on. And the point that you make that the Naxal violence has shrunk in the number of districts and so on. But this is what I write in my article. That's true. But, and this I quote from the IG of Bastar, who says that even today, there was about 10 years ago, 4,000 kilometers, which is outside the rule of the Indian state. And that has probably shrunk now to 1,000 kilometers. So in the heart of India, you have 1,000 kilometers, and you must take these 1,000 kilometers numbers by approximation. But the fact that 1,000 kilometers is outside the governance and administration of the state in the heart of India must be telling us something about how we are actually trying to resolve these issues. It must tell us also that this is state failure. That the first thing you have to do is to be in control of your territory. And therefore, the local versus outsider problem is about the sentiments of the people. And it must be taken into account, because there's also the case that there are too many locals and you have a problem for the fact that they have sympathies. They have to actually live there. They're not like the outsiders who come and go. And I must tell you my experience once with a mother, and I was that time commanding my unit as a colonel. I was in central Kashmir, and I was speaking to her, and I was told that one of her sons has become a military. So I was speaking to her, and I told her, why don't you get him back? Why don't you tell him to come back and live normally, go to college and so on? This is what she told me, and I can never forget the tone of her conversation. She said, what you're saying is right, but you will be here for 2 years and you will go away. After that, I don't know whether they will protect my son. So who do I trust? And she had a point. So the point is that their trust for locals can work both ways. They can actually side with the insurgent because they have to survive there, or they can side with the state forces and the central forces if they know that these people can subdue the insurgent. So their notion of who's winning decides how they actually react to supporting the state or supporting the insurgent. Because if they think that the insurgent is winning, then they will sit on the fence and wait for things to pan out. So we have to be cognizant of such things, people who have actually been caught in the midst of violence, who see loss of life, loss of limb, and live in the fear of their own lives. We have to understand how they feel like. We have to understand the tribals. I mean, the hard punch way of dealing with India's tribal right in the midst of central India itself is a questionable proposition after all. They are much more older than any of us who actually live here in terms of their ethnicity. The only thing is, they have now been, let's say, their shortcomings have been exploited by Naxal ideology. So we have to wean them away from them, and you can't do it purely by force. Force will control violence to an extent that the state becomes effective. But if you think that violence itself is going to solve the problem, I don't think we understand the nature of the problem. It can only be solved politically, not by force.
Right. But, sir, the thing is, police have lost their credibility, but it's not just in the Naxal affected districts. If you see in urban centers of India or even semi urban centers of India, police are generally thought of as corrupt. And one of the main reasons is the political police nexus, especially regarding police transfers. And in your article, you actually appeal to the current governing disposition to use their political mileage to push through these tricky reforms and rather long pending reforms. Would you like to talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the point is like this, and I make the point that people have lost trust in the state, but they have not lost trust in Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of the country. They still believe and have blind faith in what he says and does. What I say is, this is probably the right time for Narendra Modi, because people will believe, they trust him, to push these reforms through. But what it will do is, it will weaken the ability of political parties to use the police for their purposes. So if the Prime Minister is willing to deprive the BJP of such a power, because that is what the reforms will do, that is what the court has mandated, then it is possible. And I make the point again that as far as posterity is concerned, if Narendra Modi pushes these two foundational reforms, is what I call them, the police force and the criminal justice systems, his name in Indian history is assured. So I go back to what I said before. It all depend upon whether he can put the nation before the party.
But this would also include certain reforms for the central armed police force as well, right? Because the redistribution of power must also be considered.
Absolutely. For all police forces, center, state, everything.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, so this, whether it's the Naxalites or the broader police force, this is all connected to a deep problem within the system that you've already mentioned. So unless the politicians are not willing to, induct police reforms, then nothing will change, whether it's the central or the state, because, the state also has the ability to ensure reforms in the police, but, for some reason they haven't done so. And in some states like UP, it's totally out of control. So so what do you think that the government should consider as crucial components to ensure such a reform? And if not, is there a possibility of an independent body to be set up to overlook this, or is that not the best way to go about it?
See, all we have to do is to ensure what is already given in the Constitution itself, that these police, the IAS, the civil services, they are supposed to ring fence and protect the Constitution, not the political party in power. Problem is the undermining of these institutions by political parties for their own political purposes, narrow domestic purposes. That is the problem. Whether they will do it or not, what I am saying is that Narendra Modi can do it because he is now in that position of popularity. And the type of support that he will get from the country and the countrymen will be tremendous, is what I'm saying. And that's why I call it a Sudarshan Chakra. If he can't do it, I don't think there's anybody else who can do it. And there's no need for any commission to oversee, because we've got plenty of them to oversee. All that is already there. Another mechanism will not work. It's only political will. Do they have it? I don't know.
Yeah. But I'd like to ask one final question. Have there been any states that have actually ensured police reform in India, and are there any model states for which we can look at as an example?
Well, there are no model states, but I think there are some states which have done better than the others. Kerala, I think Himachal, some of the northeastern states to a certain extent. Not much in the Indo-Gangetic belt. So, for many years, every state had to send a progress report about what is they've done about police reform mandated by the Supreme Court. So that even now they had another commission to see what was the progress on the implementation of those directions and so on. So it's got a long history behind it.
Hmm.
So it's not that it cannot be done. But remember, we have a problem not only in the states, we also have a problem at the center. See, because after all, when you look at it, you look at the use of, let's say, intelligence agencies. You look at the use of the National Security Act against journalists, students, and so on. Those are a blatant misuse of power. And that can only happen if the people who are heading these organizations also don't actually protest, or don't stand their ground as professionals.
Yes.
That has all been undermined. And it's not a process which has started now. It's been ongoing for a long time, but we only, I suppose, because the social media and so on, awareness of that misuse is growing. Sort of, it's startling. It stares you in the eye.
Yeah. Okay, so on that note, thank you, General Menon and Ruturaj, for joining me.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Be safe. Take care, both of you.
You as well.
The Takshashila Institution is an independent, non-partisan think tank and a school of public policy. We have education programs lasting 1 semester and 1 year that are tailored specifically for people like you. They are all online and you can take them from anywhere. Admissions are now open for our 12-week graduate certificate program in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology policy, and health and life sciences. Visit takshashila.org.in/courses to find out more. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, thewholetruthfoods.com, Sierra, PayPal, and Cred. We thank you all for your support. Tune into The Note, where Maruk Inayat talks to Dr. Bipin Joshi about the second wave of COVID. He calls it no less than World War III. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Yoshita Dave, who's a sex educator and intimacy coach. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam Gupta was joined by Amit Thakkar and Hiral Jain of Market Pulse Technologies, and they talked about trading in Indian markets. All Things Policy by the Takshashila Institute had on board Mihir Mahajan and Pranay Kotastane to talk about the recent changes in the Indian intellectual property front. You should definitely check out the Cyrus Says episode with Ace casting director Mukesh Chabra. They discussed some of his best work. We also had Ira Mukhoti, who has authored various books on history and mythology from a female gaze. The IPL season's in full swing, and we have Edges and Sledges in English and Khel Niti in Hindi if you want to check out cricket content. Really great conversations on both of those shows. Do check those out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with Postcards from Nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure, and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.